So after our mishap that we had in our last video, we're going to finish off this project by getting into some of the details. To paint the gun bay, I'm just using Vallejo brass, and I'm trying to be a little bit precise, but it doesn't quite matter because we're going to cheat by using a wash later. Now to replicate copper, I just add a little bit of red to the brass and it does the job. Now to finish it off, I'm just using some graphite powder to kind of make all the gun barrels and the links look a little bit more gunmetal. Now here is where I'm going to be able to hide all my sins. So I'm just using Citadel Null Oil Wash, and when we put that in, I'm going to of course clean this up a little bit, but it's going to kind of hide some of the delineation between the yellow and the brass, and so it doesn't quite look so bad. Now I know what you're thinking, that's a lot, but don't worry, I can wick it away. It's not the end of the world. Now some of the decal film is still showing a bit, so I'm using a 3000 grit sanding sponge to just kind of blend that in a little bit better, and so you can't see the edge. So now for my favorite part, the oil wash. I'm just using mineral spirits and Starship Filth, just kind of letting it flow into all the different cracks. Gonna put it on a little bit thick, and then we're gonna clean up a little bit more later. And then this is my favorite part, just putting the wash over that insignia really makes it look like it's just popping and coming to life. So I've got a specialized Q-tip here that I'm using, and it's got a little bit of mineral spirits on it, and I'm just kind of dragging it along as you go through the flow of airflow along the fuselage, and it creates a really good effect. But what we want to do is just try to remove anything that just looks like a big tide mark or anything looks out of place, and just remove until you have just the right amount of oil on the surface. Now if you get impatient like I am right here, you can just be able to use some paper towel and send in the same method and remove all that excess a lot faster. The good thing with oils is they're very forgiving. If I go in and I remove too much, okay, then I can just put back on more oil. If it has too much, then I can easily remove it. And so we can go back and forth until we have just the right mix. Right now for some streaking, so I'm just using black oil as well and just kind of making a haphazard line, and then just drag along the surface to remove until there's just kind of a faint line. And so you can see on the left where I started out with, where there's a lot of oil on there, and then on the right wing we have it almost removed. And like I said, don't worry if you remove too much, you can always add it back. So doing the same thing for the top of the flaps, but just keep in mind it's usually not quite as dirty because, you know, gravity's a thing, and so keep that in mind. And so here's where we are at this point. A few things to clean up a little bit, but looking pretty good. Now to work with some inks for the exhaust and a few other places. Now I started switching over to some like the AK and the Liquitex inks and been pretty impressed, but I might go back to some of the other stuff that I've used in the past that is more of a filter. But what it allows you to do is if you thin it down and dial down your air pressure, you can create a really good smoky effect. Now this part is actually part of the exhaust. From references, it gets pretty cruddy and dirty just like anything else with exhaust, and so we'll be using this black on there too. Now looking at my references, the geared door gets pretty charred from that exhaust, and it makes a really cool effect, so I wanted to replicate that with some of the inks as well. This part I'm switching over to a brown kind of raw sienna type mix. And also adding that raw sienna mix to the exhaust as well. Now switching back to black, I'm just adding a little bit of soot to the end of each of the gun pipes, and then also a little bit coming out of the ejector shell ports. Now for some more oils. So I'm grabbing that dark gray oil, and I'm just blotting on into certain areas on the wing. What that's going to do is give us a little bit more of an oxidized look in those areas. So now I'm grabbing my mop brush and getting into some stippling. So just keep on poking at it, and what we want to do is obviously not make it look like it's actual oil to the surface, but just enough to where it's kind of changing the color. So almost like a targeted filter in a way, but not overall, just in certain haphazard stippled areas. So you should notice that I'm changing to a bigger mop because it's going to give a little bit of a different effect because we're trying to create a lot of variety. So this is then replicated in other parts of the airframe. So here I'm mixing the dark gray with some sand And that's gonna make our dust effect. So I'm just tapping that into some of the roots, and especially the wing root, and anywhere that people are walking on. And we're gonna just kind of do the same exact process as we did with the gray. You can also create a little bit of rain streaking type patterns on the sides of the fuselage that really, I think, added really cool detail to it. Now, don't forget about the bottom of the wings. You're going to have all sorts of different dirt and dust that's going to get flipped up from the wheels, and different things that are going to leak out of the wheel wells. So we definitely need to take care of those. Now, the way that I like to paint my props is generally starting out with some kind of aluminum, dark steel, some kind of metallic, and then putting black, and then also different shades of NATO black that we'll get into. Now, after the black, I'm going to use my filter and paint NATO black. And some of these will actually have a little bit of a grain to it. You can kind of do a little bit of that with the flow of the air, and can be really convincing. And then freehand, I'm just painting that NATO black onto the rubber boots to kind of give it a little bit more of a contrast, since, you know, they're rubber. Now switching over to the bombs, gave it an olive drab base, and then now I'm using a little bit more of a yellowish tint to it through that filter. That's going to give it a nice kind of worn contrasty look. Now to go the other direction, I'm using my filter to paint a brown to the surface. So at this point it's looking a little bit stark and splotchy, but with the next step, it'll get just there. So now I'm going over it with some really light olive drab to kind of tone down what we just did so it looks a little bit more natural. And here's the result of our efforts. But we're not done yet. Got to get some oils. So I'm just using a sponge to apply haphazard oils into just random places onto the bomb. So now I'm grabbing a damp mop and just stippling it to make it look a little bit more like it's naturally applied dust rather than with a sponge. Now to give the wheels a little bit of a dust treatment. Starting out just with that sand color and just applying it all over. Then we're gonna use a few different shades to kind of make it a little bit more natural and not just monochromatic. So we're going in with a little bit of a lighter color because we want to make it a little bit more realistic. When you have your dirt, it's always not really just monochromatic. There's a little bit of different coloration to it. Also, I doubt that this airframe is only going to be taking off and landing in one area. Since my aim is to have a dusty wheel and not a muddy wheel, I'm removing most of the oil with this Q-tip, and I'm just kind of taking it from the center and just dragging it to the outside, as centrifugal forces kind of will do that with the dirt and mud. And at this point, I should talk about how I am now accepting donations to the Cameron's Manicure Fund. As you can see, pretty necessary. Now to remove all the different stuff on top of the treads, because we kind of want to have the dust stick in between the treads only. So I failed to mention, this is the Art Scale Kit's 3D printed tires, and you can see like the Goodyear logo on it. Really good. The kit tires were actually pretty good, and I like how they can have the option for like an actual sag on them. These don't, but in the end I decided to go with a little bit crisper detailed tires. Faster way to remove all that excess oil is just twist the tire like it naturally would inside a paper towel, and what comes out in the end is pretty lifelike. And here's our end result. For the prop, I'm just using 1500 grit sanding sponges, and I'm just running them along the leading and trailing edges of the prop where it's going to be getting all that wear. And what I should have done is added a little bit of a clear barrier coat in between the metallic and the black, because there's a few parts where I did sand through that, but in the end it wasn't really hard. All I had to do was airbrush some metallics to just cover up those different points where the plastic came through. And here's our end result. So if you remember from the previous video, I was saying that I was kind of rushing a few things because I wanted to get it done for a contest that, you know, it didn't win anything in, but whatever. But I was able to actually finish it in time. And so there is a few things that I do need to change that has been called out off of the internet. The landing gear doors, they're backwards. And then the gun bays, where not for the ammunition racks, but where the actual guns are, that is not on a hinge. So it's just kind of floating there, and that needs to be changed. I might do a little bit more tweaking with a few other things, but those are the only things that have really been called out. So let me know what you guys think. Is it something where I achieved what I was looking for, or, well, back to the drawing board and we're going to have to try again with another one?